stuff all the things I love. Like I need a traffic jam to keep in touch. I can't focus on the words unless my hands are busy. I can't give up on the world or I will leave this city. And it's way too broad what I'm trying to say, but I write it down and let it go. And it's hard to know all the words I need to explain my heart in a single note.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the hiatus re-book club. Something just clattered in my house. I don't know if you could hear that. Also, my neighbor's been mowing their lawn for like 2 days straight, so I'm sorry if they start up again while I'm talking. I just wanted to give a quick intro update. So this week, actually, I never said what the book was last week. So in case anybody is not sure what's going on, what this is me reading Ella Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine to you and giving my thoughts and commentary on it. Last week, if you go back in the feed and look at episode 1, that's chapters 1 through 7, remastered from being played at the end of various past episodes. And then this is also a remaster of past episodes. There's no new chapters here. This is actually chapters 8 through 15, which is more than I intended to do, but the edit was actually just easier just based on the way I had read them if I just left 14 and 15 together. So I did, because I'm all about making it easy. Let me see. I didn't listen like straight through all of these. I just cut out like extra preamble at the beginning and like stuff that was no longer true at the end. Like we'll be back with a new episode next week or whatever, just like time locked things that are not true. So there might still be plenty of like weird gaps in the middle of the episode, or like I might like warn you about page turning noises multiple times in the middle of various ones of these. So that's just, sometimes that's how life is. People repeat themselves. But this is a great big segment of the book. A lot happens. I really hope you enjoy it. Oh, and I wanted to give an update on like life for your favorite 3 co-hosts. Actually, I don't really have an update for Ben. I think he's just been like working and stuff. But Erin, instead of doing 10 days in Paris with her mom, had to do a week instead because she actually got COVID probably on her way to Ireland to see her parents. So she'd been there for a few days and then started to feel like she had a cold and tested positive. And obviously they were supposed to go to Paris the next day. They canceled that flight. And she stayed home and her parents nursed her back to health. It was only really a few days that she was down, and it never got too bad for her. Fortunately, her parents never caught it from her. They have had COVID relatively recently, so perhaps had some extra immunity as well as the vaccines. And Erin obviously is vaccinated, so it was very fortunately it was not too bad, and they were both still able to go. So she's there right now, and she's loving it. Last I saw, they were in the Champagne region drinking a lot of champagne. I got a catio for the cats and have been super enjoying training them how to use the door flap and hanging out with them outside. And Ian and I have been having a really good time with that. Another thing I wanted to mention is that there is a new show on Netflix. It's called First Blood. It's called First Blood. First Kill. It's called First Kill. There's a new show on Netflix. It's called First Kill. It's based on a short story by V.E. Schwab. It's about a vampire falling in love with a vampire hunter. And they're both women. And so I thought that might be of interest to some wide swath of our listeners to know about that. I've been binging it today, which is like the day after it came out. And the other thing that I learned that I didn't know before I started watching it is that it also is set in Savannah and largely filmed in Savannah. there's a ton of establishing shots in it that I super recognize, like streets I've walked down many, many times. And so if you're someone who's been to Savannah or wants to know what the vibe is, that's another good reason to check it out. Is the show, is like the writing excellent? I can't like say that necessarily. And I also read online that they were supposed to, they had a permit to film at this like historic cemetery in Savannah called Colonial Park Cemetery, which you can walk to from like the old historic district. And it's like a big tourist destination. And it was revoked because they were not like respecting the cemetery while they were there. And so the town revoked their permit to film there, which is funny because it's in the first episode, like them going to quote unquote Colonial Park Cemetery, but it's not. It's a different place. So that's just a little like bonus extra thing that maybe would have been my obsession. It's a little schlocky. I feel like the makeup is often kind of weird. Like it's gay and it takes place in Savannah. So like how mad can I actually be? You know, NVE Schwab is a great writer. I don't blame her for any of the bad writing at all. So anyway, here comes I keep calling them episodes. Here comes chapters 8 through 15 for you. I will talk to you again next week, and there will be some new chapters towards the end of next week's episode. So look forward to that. Talk to you soon. Bye. So this is chapter 8. Hattie didn't know about Lucinda and the curse, but she understood I always had to follow her orders. After I rubbed dust in her face, all she did was smile. The smile meant that dust weighed little in the balance of her power. I retreated to a corner of the coach and gazed out the window. Hattie hadn't ordered me not to take the necklace back again. What if I lifted it over her large head? Or what if I yanked it off her neck? It would be better broken than owned by her. I tried. I told my arms to move. I told my hands to grasp. But the curse wouldn't let me. If someone else had ordered me to take it back, I would have had to. But I couldn't will myself to reclaim it. So I made myself look at it as to become accustomed to the sight. While I stared, Hattie stroked the chain, gloating. In a few minutes, her eyes closed. Her mouth fell open and she began to snore. Olive crossed the carriage to sit next to me. I want a present to show we're friends too, she said. Why don't you give me a gift instead? The furrows in her forehead deepened. No, you give me an order. What would you like? I asked. I want money. Give me money. As he'd promised, my father had given me a purse of silver KJs. I reached into my carpet bag and pulled out a coin. Here you are. Now we're friends. She spat on the coin and rubbed it to make it shine. We're friends, she agreed. She crossed back to her former seat and brought the coin close to her eyes to study it. I looked at the snoring Hattie. She was probably dreaming of ways to order me about. I looked at Olive, who was running the edge of the KJ over her forehead and down her nose. I began to long for finishing school. At least there they wouldn't be my only companions. In a few minutes, Olive joined Hattie in slumber. When I was certain both of them were soundly asleep, I dared to fetch Mandy's other present, the book of fairy tales, out of my bag. I turned away from the two of them to hide the book and to catch the light from the carriage window. When I opened it, instead of a fairy tale, I found an illustration of Mandy. She was dicing a turnip. Next to the turnip was the chicken I had watched her pluck that morning. She was crying. I had suspected she was fighting back tears when she hugged me. The page blurred because my eyes filled with tears too, but I refused to cry in front of Hattie and Olive, even if they were asleep. If Mandy had been in the coach with me, she would have hugged me, and I could have cried as long as I liked. She would have patted my back and told me, no, these thoughts would make me cry. If Mandy were here, she'd tell me why it would be big, bad magic to turn Hattie into a rabbit, and I'd wonder again what fairies were good for. That helped. I checked to make sure they were still sleeping. Then I examined the next page. It showed a room that probably was in King Gerald's castle because Char was there and the crest of Kiri was painted on the wall above a tapestry. Char was talking to 3 soldiers who had been in the ogre's guard at the menagerie. I puzzled about the meaning. Maybe an explanation would follow. I turned the page and found 2 more illustrations, neither one of Char or soldiers. On the verso was a map of Frel. There was our manor, bearing the legend Sir Peter of Frel. My fingers traced the route to the old castle and onto the menagerie. There was the south road out of Frel, the road we were on now, far beyond the map's boundaries, far beyond the manor of Sir Peter of Frel. The right-hand illustration showed Father's coach, followed by 3 mule-drawn wagons loaded with goods for trade. Father sat atop the coach with the driver, who was plying his whip. Father leaned into the wind and grinned. What would the book show me next? A real fairy tale this time, The Shoemaker and the Elves. In this version, though, each elf had a personality, and I came to know them better than the shoemaker. And I finally understood why the elves disappeared after the shoemaker made clothes for them. They went away to help a giant rid herself of a swarm of mosquitoes, too small for her to see. Although the elves left a thank you note for the shoemaker, he put his coffee cup down on it, and it stuck to the cup's damp bottom. The story made sense now. Okay, something interesting about that part. I can't remember where I read this exactly, but I believe that the inspiration for this book, for Gail Carson Levine, came from basically her trying to come up with those types of stories, like the other side of all types of different fairy tales. I feel like I remember her using this example specifically when I read this, wherever I read it. It must have been like an interview she did at some point. But it was like a project. It was like a writing project for like a class of some kind, I think. And that was her initial prompt, was kind of like exploring sort of the unexplored edges and sides of fairy tales, which obviously has been a rich vein for a lot of people. But this was kind of before, I'm pretty sure this came out before, like, you know, was the book called Wicked too? Like, you know, those like villain-sided books. But anyway, the story made sense now. Your book must be fascinating. Let me see it, Hattie said. I jumped. If she took this from me too, I'd kill her. The book got heavier as I handed it over. Her eyes widened as she read. You enjoy this? The life cycle of the centaur tick? She turned pages. Gnomish silver mining in hazardous terrain? Isn't it interesting? I said, my panic subsiding. You can read it for a while. If we're going to be friends, we should have the same interests. You can share my interest, dear, she returned the book. Our journey taught me what to expect from Hattie. At the inn on our first night, she informed me that I had taken the space in their carriage that would otherwise have been occupied by their maid. But we shan't suffer, because you can take her place. She cocked her head to one side. No, you are almost noble. It would be an insult to make a servant of you. You will be my lady-in-waiting, and I shall share you with my sisters sometimes. Ollie, is there something Ella can do to help you? No, I can dress and undress myself, Olive said defiantly. No one said you can't. Hattie sat on the bed we were all to share. She lifted her feet. Kneel down and take my slippers off for me, Ella. My toes ache. Without comment, I removed them. My nose filled... Page turn. With the ripe smell of her feet. I carried the slippers to the window and tossed them out. Hattie yawned. You've only made extra work for yourself. Go down and fetch them now. Olive rushed to the window. Your slippers fell into a bucket of slops. I had to carry the stinking slippers back to our room, but Hattie had to wear them until she was able to get fresh ones from her trunk. After that, she thought more carefully about her commands. At breakfast the next morning, she pronounced the porridge inedible. Don't eat it, Ella. It will make you sick. She loaded her spoon with the oatmeal. Steam rose from the bowl before me, and I caught the scent of cinnamon. Mandy always put cinnamon in her porridge, too. Why are you eating it if it's bad? Olive asked her sister. I'm hungry. Yours looks all right. I'm eating mine even though it's vile. Her tongue licked a speck of cereal off the corner of her mouth. Because I need nourishment to take charge on our journey. You're not in Olive began. You don't fancy your porridge, miss? The innkeeper sounded worried. My sister's stomach is queasy, Hattie said. You may take her bowl away. I'm not her sister, I said as the innkeeper disappeared into the kitchen. Hattie laughed, scraping her spoon around her empty bowl for the last remnants of porridge. The innkeeper was back with a plate of thick brown bread studded with nuts and raisins. Perhaps this will tempt the lass's stomach, he said. I managed to take a big bite before a lady at the next table called him away. Put it down, Ella. Hattie broke off a corner of the bread and tasted it. It's much too rich. Rich food is good for me, Olive said, reaching across the table. Between them, my breakfast disappeared in 4 bites. That swallow of bread was the last food I had on our 3-day trip, except for tonic. Hattie would have deprived me of it, too, except she sampled it first, and then I relished her nauseated expression when she swallowed. That's the end of that chapter. So, just a big taste of how shitty Hattie is, especially. But I thought that was cool to get more information from the book too. And I think something that is interesting about the book is that it's not really straightforward in how, like, what it shows or why. You'll see more of that later. But there are times when she tries to ask it for certain things, and it's not like an on-demand type of thing, which is maybe part of why it's not considered big magic. I don't know. It's got a bit of a mind of its own. We passed through rich farmland on the final day of our journey to Jen, the town where our finishing school was located. The day was hazy and warm, and I was almost too hot to be hungry. Hattie had energy for only one command: to fan her. "Fan me too," Olive said. She had worked out that if Hattie told me to do something, I would do it, and if she directed me to do the same thing, I would do that too. Hattie hadn't explained my obedience to her. She didn't bother to explain much to the slow-thinking Olive, and she must have enjoyed keeping the delicious secret to herself. My arms ached. My stomach rumbled. I stared out the window at a flock of sheep and wished for a diversion that would take my mind away from lamb and lentil salad. My wish was granted instantly as the coach took off in a mad gallop. "Ogres!" the coachman yelled. A cloud of dust hid the road behind us. Through it, I made out a band of ogres kicking up the dust as they chased us. But we were outdistancing them. The cloud was receding. "Why do you run from your friends?" one of them called. It was the sweetest voice I had ever heard. "We bear gifts of your heart's desires, riches, love, eternal life." Heart's desire? Mother, the ogres would bring her back from death. Why were we tearing away from everything we most wanted? Oh, for those who have not heard the previous chapters, if there are any of you, ogres in this world also have like a special power of basically like charming people with their voices, so they can get humans to do what they want because they fool them into thinking that they're like their best buds. "Slow down," Hattie ordered unnecessarily. The coachman had already reined in the horses. The ogres were only yards behind. Untouched by their magic, the sheep were baaing and bleating their fear. Briefly, their noise covered the honeyed words and the spell broke. I remembered that the ogres couldn't revive Mother. The horses were again whipped to a gallop. But the ogres would be beyond the sheep in a minute, and we'd be at their mercy again. I shouted to Hattie and Olive and to the coachman and footman, "Yell so you can't hear them!" The coachman understood first and joined my voice with his, shouting words I'd never heard before. Then Hattie began. "Eat me last! Eat me last!" she shrieked. But it was Olive who saved us. Her wordless roar drowned out thought. I don't know how she drew breath. The sound was unending. It continued as we passed the outlying homes of Jen, while the ogres faded from sight and while I recovered from my fright. "Quiet, Ollie," Hattie said. "Nobody's going to be eaten. You're giving me a headache." But Olive didn't hush until the coachman stopped the carriage, came inside with us, and slapped her smartly across the face. "Sorry, miss," he said, and popped back out. Finishing school was in an ordinary wooden house. Except for its enormous ornamental shrubs pruned into the shapes of wide-skirted maidens, it might have been the house of any not-so-prosperous merchant. I hoped the lunch portions were generous. The door opened as we drove up, and an erect, gray-haired lady strutted down the walkway to our carriage. "Welcome, young ladies." She swept into the smoothest curtsy I'd ever seen. We curtsied in return. She waved a hand at me. "But who is this?" I spoke quickly before Hattie could explain me in a way I didn't want to be explained. "I'm Ella, madam. My father is Sir Peter of Frel. He wrote a letter." From my carpet bag, I extracted father's letter and the purse he'd given me. She tucked the letter and the purse, after weighing it expertly in her palm, into her apron pocket. "What a lovely surprise! I am Madam Edith, headmistress of your new home. Welcome to our humble establishment." She curtsied again. I wished she'd stop. My right knee cracked when I went down. "We just had lunch." So much for generous portions. "And we are sitting down to our embroidery. The young ladies are anxious to meet you, and it's never too soon to start being finished." She ushered us into a large, sunny room. "Young ladies," she announced, "here are 3 new friends for you." A roomful of maidens rose, curtsied, then resumed their seats. Each one wore a pink gown with a yellow hair ribbon. My gown was stained and wrinkled from the journey, and my hair was probably limp and unkempt. "Back to work, ladies," Madam Edith said. "Sewing mistress will help the new pupils." I lowered myself into a chair near the door and stared defiantly at the elegance around me. I met the eyes of a girl about my age. She smiled hesitantly. Maybe my look softened because her smile grew and she winked. Sewing mistress approached, bearing a needle, an assortment of colored thread, and a round of white linen marked with a design of flowers. I was to follow the outline and stitch the flowers in thread. The cloth could then cover a pillow or the back of a chair. After she explained what to do, sewing mistress left me. assuming I would know how to do it. But I had never before held a needle. Although I watched the other girls, I could not thread it. I struggled for a quarter hour till sewing mistress rushed to my side. "The child has been raised by ogres or worse," she exclaimed, snatching it away from me. "Hold it delicately. It's not a spear. One brings the thread to it." She threaded the needle with green thread and returned it to me. I held it delicately, as ordered. She left my side, and I stared stupidly at my task. Then I stuck the needle into the outline of a rose. My head ached from lack of food. "You have to knot the end of the thread and start underneath." The speaker was the last who had winked at me. She had pulled her chair next to mine. "And sewing mistress will ridicule I can't say the word ridicule. Sewing mistress will ridicule you if you sew a green rose. Roses have to be red or pink, or yellow if you're daring." A pink gown similar to the one she wore was spread across her lap. She bent her head over it to make a tiny stitch. Her dark hair was plaited into many braids that were gathered and woven into a knot high on her head. Her skin was the color of cinnamon, with a tint of raspberry in her cheeks. I couldn't help thinking of food. Her lips curved up naturally, giving her a pleased and contented air. Her name was Areda, and her family lived in Amanta, a city just over the border in Eortha. She spoke with an Eorthan accent, smacking her lips after the letter M and pronouncing her L's as Y's. And if you think I'm going to try to duplicate that accent, you're sorely mistaken. Sorry, not sorry. Abensa utu anja ubensu. I hoped this was Eorthan for "I'm pleased to meet you." I had learned it from a parrot. She smiled at me ecstatically. "Ubensu Okomo Eortha?" I only know a few words, I confessed. She was miserably disappointed. "It would have been so nice to have someone to talk to in my language." "You could teach me." Your accent is good," she said doubtfully, "but writing mistress teaches Eorthan to everyone, and no one has picked it up at all. I have a knack for languages." She started to teach me right then. Once heard, always remembered is the way with languages and me. By the end of an hour, I was forming short sentences. Areda was delighted. "Uchu ubensu evtame orgento?" I asked. "Do you like finishing school?" She shrugged. "You don't? Is it terrible?" I asked, reverting to Kyrian. A shadow fell across my neglected sewing. Sewing mistress picked up my pillow cover and announced dramatically, 3 stitches in all this time. 3 vast, messy stitches, like 3 teeth in a toothless gum. Go to your room and stay there until it's time for bed. No supper for you tonight." My stomach growled so loudly that the whole room must have heard it. Hattie smirked at me. She couldn't have planned better herself. I wouldn't add to her pleasure. "I'm not hungry," I announced. "Then you may do without breakfast as well, for your impertinence." So that's the end of the chapter. So you guys tell me if anyone is listening to this anymore, even though I'm not being consistent, and I know we've only just met her, but I have posited before, I think on 2 separate episodes of the podcast, that I feel like there's a potential for a sapphic kind of love connection between Ella and Areda. I don't think I'm pronouncing it right, but the friend that she just met, it kind of starts in my mind with the way that she describes her in this chapter. I feel like it's very like admiring and like romantic, and part of that is the food associations that are also because she's hungry, but you know, just pay attention to it. Maybe I shouldn't have planted the seed so early. Maybe this is kind of spoiling it for you guys, or not spoiling, but like too influencing of a thing. But like, I don't know, like it would be cool if Ella was bisexual. I think she could still end up with the prince at the end. I don't mind. So I don't know. Let me know if you thought that could be read as sort of a not just a friend level connection. It's again very early on. I'll definitely point out the scene that I think is especially kind of like romantic. We're on chapter 10. A maid showed me to a corridor lined with doors. Each one was painted a different pastel color and had a card affixed to it announcing the name of the room. We passed the lime room, the daisy room, and the opal room, and stopped before the lavender room. The maid opened the door. For a moment, I forgot my hunger. I was in a cloud of light purple. Some of the purples blushed faintly pink. Others were tinted pale blue, but there was no other color. The curtains were streamers, undulating from the breeze made by the door closing behind me. Beneath my feet was a hooked rug in the design of a huge violet. In a corner stood a clay chamber pot disguised as decorative cabbage. I always forget what a chamber pot is. And I wish I could keep forgetting. The 5 beds were swathed in a gauzy fabric. The 5 bureaus were painted with wavy stripes of pale and paler lavender. I wanted to throw myself on a bed and cry about being so hungry and about everything else, but those were not beds onto which one could throw oneself. A purple chair was placed next to one of the 2 windows. I sank into it. If I didn't succumb to starvation, I would be here for a long time, with hateful mistresses and with Hattie ordering me about. I stared out the window at Madame Edith's garden until exhaustion and hunger produced a kind of stupor in me. In a while, I slept. Here, Ella, you can eat this. An urgent whisper pushed its way into my dream, and my dream about roasted pheasant stuffed with chestnuts. Someone shook my shoulder. Wake up, Ella, wake up. An order. I was awake. Areta thrust a roll into my hands. It's all I could get. Eat it before the others come in. In 2 swallows, I ate the soft white roll, more air than sustenance, but more sustenance than I'd had in days. Thank you. Do you sleep here too? She nodded. Where? The door opened and 3 maidens entered. Look, queer ducks flock together. The speaker was the tallest pupil in the school. She pronounced her L's as Y's, mocking Areta's accent. Eshete ifibensi asuru edans evtame orgento? I asked Areta. Is this how they behave at finishing school? Otemso ifibensi ashura ipiri. Sometimes they are much worse. Are you from Eortha too? The tall maiden asked me. No, but Areta is teaching me the beautiful Eorthan language. And Eorthan, you are an Ibwi Unju. It only meant tall girl. I didn't know any insults in Eorthan. However, Areta was laughing, which made it seem the worst of epithets. I laughed too. Areta collapsed on top of me. And together we shook the purple chair. Madame Edith, the headmistress, bustled in. Young ladies, what do I see? Areta leapt up, but I remained seated. I couldn't stop laughing. My chairs are not made to take such abuse, and young ladies do not sit 2 to a seat. Do you hear me? Ella, stop your unseemly laughter. I stopped mid-giggle. That's better. Since it's your first day here, I shall excuse your behavior and trust that it will not happen tomorrow. Madame Edith turned to the others. Into your night dresses, young ladies. The shores of sleep are approaching. Oh my God. Areta and I exchanged glances. It was very cheering to have a friend. Everyone else reached the shores of sleep, but I remained oceans away. I had been given a night dress so covered with bows and frills that I couldn't lie flat comfortably. I slipped out of bed and opened my carpet bag. If I couldn't sleep, I could read. Madame Edith thought fear of the dark was to be expected in young ladies, so a lamp was left burning. My book opened to a letter from Mandy. Dear Ella, this morning I baked scones. Bertha and Nathan and I will eat them for a snack before we go to bed, but I baked 2 extra. We'll have to divide yours and eat them too. I promised myself I wouldn't trouble you by saying how much I miss you, and see how I start. The parrot man, name of Simon, came here today with one of his birds to give you. It speaks Gnomic and Elfian. He said it wasn't fine enough for the menagerie, but you might like it. He told me what to feed it. I never thought I'd be cooked to a parrot. I wish it would stop talking once in a while. I wonder if I have a recipe for parrot stew. Don't worry, sweet. I would never cook your present. Yesterday, you had a grander visitor and received a bigger gift than a bird. The prince himself came to see you, leading a centaur cult. When I told him you were away from home, he wanted to know where you'd gone and when you'd be back. And when he heard you were at finishing school, he was indignant. He demanded to know why you needed to be finished, since there was nothing wrong with you to start with. I couldn't answer him because I'd like to ask that father of yours the same question. I did tell him we had nowhere to keep a growing centaur. He's a little beauty, but what can I do with him? Your prince said he'd raise him for you. He asked me to tell you the colt's name, Apple. That made me remember my manners, and I gave him his name to eat before he left with the prince. Speaking of leaving, your father departed the same day you did. Said he was off to the Greenies, which I gather was his disrespectful name for the elves. Said not to expect him back anytime soon. I wish you were coming home soon. Bertha and Nathan send their love, and I send mine by the bushel, by the barrel, by the ton. From your old cook, Mandy. P.S. Drink your tonic. I don't know if that's a repeated phrase in the book or not, by the bushel, by the barrel, by the ton. I'm really not sure. You know, I've read this book a lot of times, and there are like certain lines in it that like trigger my crying reflex, and that's one of them. I just like started to tear up. It's very sweet. I closed the book and whispered to its spine, "Don't erase the letter, please." Then I drank my tonic. A centaur cult, a little beauty. If only I could see him and pet him and let him know me. The tears that hadn't come in the afternoon came now. Mandy would be desperate if she knew I hadn't eaten in 3 days, and if she knew I was under the thumb of a monster like Hattie. I would say I'm sorry about the rustling noises. I'm not sorry, but I did forget to warn you that this isn't like an audiobook. It's like a bedtime story. So sorry, not sorry for the rustling noises. I do apologize if they do bother you. The next morning, Music Mistress led us in song and singled out my off-key voice. "Ella does not notice that there is more than one note," she told everyone. "Come here, child, sing this." She played a note on the harpsichord. I wouldn't be able to. I could never carry a tune. What would happen when I couldn't obey? I sang the wrong note. Music Mistress frowned. "Higher, or we shall send you to a different school to sing with the young gentlemen." She depressed the key again. My next attempt was much too high. One lass covered her ears. I wished her an earache. Music Mistress played again. My temples throbbed. I sang. A little lower. I hit the note. She played another. I sang it. She played a scale. I sang every note. I beamed. I'd always wished I could sing. I sang the scale again, louder. Perfect. "That's enough, young lady. You must sing when I tell you to, and not otherwise." An hour later, Dancing Mistress told me to step lightly. My partner was Julia, the tall maiden who had teased Areta the night before. I pressed on her arms, using her to support my weight so I could step lightly. "Stop that!" She pulled away. I fell. I heard giggles. Dancing Mistress took Julia's place. I couldn't lean on her. I pretended my feet were balloons. I pretended the floor would crack if I didn't move lightly. We stepped. We glided. We sprang forward, jumped back. I wasn't graceful, but I didn't shake the ground. My gown was soaked with perspiration. That's better. At lunch, Manners Mistress said, "Don't rap your knuckles on the table, Ella. The king would be ashamed of you." She frequently invoked King Gerald. Tables were forever safe from me. "Take small stitches, Eleanor, and don't yank the thread. It's not a rein and you're not a coachman," Sewing Mistress said later in the afternoon. I stabbed myself with the needle, but my stitches shrank. It was the same every day. I dreaded new orders. The curse didn't make me change easily. I had to concentrate every second. In my mind, I repeated my commands in an endless refrain. When I awoke, I instructed myself not to bounce out of bed. Leave the nightdress for the servants to put away. At breakfast, don't blow on my porridge. Don't spit out the lumps. On our afternoon walk, don't skip. Don't leap about. Once I actually spoke aloud. It was a dinner. Don't slurp, I instructed myself. I said it softly, but a pupil seated near me heard, and she told the others. The only subjects that came easily were those taught by Writing Mistress, composition and ciphering. She also taught penmanship, which was the one subject in which I did not attain excellence, mostly because Writing Mistress issued no orders. She taught Eorthian, but no other languages. When I told her I knew a little of the exotic tongues and wished to learn more, she gave me a dictionary of exotic speech. It became my second favorite book, after Mandy's Present. Whenever I had time, I practiced the languages, especially Ogreese. The meanings were dreadful, but there was an attraction in speaking the words. They were smooth, sleek, and slithery, the way a talking snake would sound. There were words like ps, sabus, delicious. If you could see this, I don't know if I described it before, but the way that it's written, there are, it's all in italics when it's Ogreese, and there are a lot of S's, obviously, but some of them are lowercase and some of them are uppercase, and so I'm sort of emphasizing the ones that are uppercase, and there's also like frequently there are other double letters that are uppercased, so that's what's happening with me when I'm trying to say these words. I'd like to see you do better. Anyway, psabus means delicious, sing means ear, hijin, dinner, efuth, taste, and fnu, sour. My progress in all of my subjects astounded the mistresses. In my first month, I did little right. In my second, I did little wrong. And gradually, it all became natural. Light steps, small stitches, quiet voice, ramrod straight back, deep curtsies without creaking knees, no yawns, soup tilted away from me, and no slurping. But in bed, before I fell asleep, I'd imagine what I would do if I were free of Lucinda's curse. At dinner, I'd paint lines of gravy on my face and hurl meat pasties at Manners Mistress. I'd pile headmistress's best china on my head and walk with a wobble and a swagger till every piece was smashed. Then I'd collect the smashed pottery and the smashed meat pasties and grind them into all my perfect stitchery. That's the end of chapter 10. Here comes chapter 11. Except for Areta, I had little pleasure from the society at finishing school. Only Hattie's set pretended to be friendly, and they treated me with the same oily condescension Hattie visited on me in public. They were an odious group, Hattie and the two she called her special friends, Blossom and Delicia. Blossom was the niece and sole heir to an unmarried earl. Her conversation was mostly worries that the earl would marry and have a child who would replace her as his heir. Delicia, the daughter of a duke, spoke rarely. When she did, it was to complain. The room was too drafty, the meal was ill-prepared, a housemaid had acted above her station, one of the other pupils wore rouge. The mistresses came to dislike me too. At first, while I was struggling to satisfy them and began to succeed, they made a pet of me, which I hated. But when finished behavior came my second nature, they learned I was nobody's pet. I spoke as infrequently as I could and met their eyes only when I had to, and I returned to my old game. Sing more softly, Ella. They can hear you in Aortha. I became inaudible. Not so soft. The rest of us would like to hear your sweet tones. I sang too loud again, and although not so much as before, music mistress had to spend a quarter hour inching me along to the desired volume. Lift your feet, young ladies. This is a spirited gavotte. My legs shot up above my waist. And so on. It was a tiresome game, but I had to play it or feel a complete puppet. Hattie didn't tell anyone about my obedience. When she had an order for me, she'd tell me to meet her in the garden after supper when no one else was near. On the first such occasion, she instructed me to pick a bouquet for her. Luckily, she didn't know I was a goddaughter to a fairy cook. I picked the most fragrant blossoms, then ran to the herb garden hoping to find something useful. Ethelwort was my preference. If I found it, Hattie would have an itchy rash on her face for a week. Most of the herbs were the ordinary sort, but as I turned to leave, I spotted a sprig of bogweed. Taking care not to breathe its scent, I plucked it and placed it next to a rose. Hattie was delighted with the flowers and buried her face in them. They're sublime, but as the scent of the bogweed worked on her, her smile faded and her expression became vacant. What would make you stop giving me orders? She answered in a flat voice. If you stopped obeying them. Of course, I had wasted a question and I had no idea how long the bogweed scent would last. But as long as it lasted, I could ask her anything and she would answer honestly. What else would stop you? I asked quickly. Nothing. She thought. My death. No likely release from that quarter. What orders do you plan to give me? I don't plan. Why do you hate me? You never admired me. Do you admire me? Yes. Why? You're pretty and brave. She envied me. I was amazed. What do you fear? I asked. Ogres, bandits, drowning, becoming ill, climbing mountains, mice, dogs, cats, birds, horses, spiders, worms, tunnels. I stopped her. She was afraid of everything. What do you want most in the world? To be queen. A rabbit queen. Only I would obey her. Her face was changing, resuming its usual expression of gleeful malice. I tried one more question. What are your secrets? She didn't answer, just tugged cruelly on a handful of my hair. Her eyes lost their dull cast. Why am I standing here? Well, hold on. What was her voice? Why am I standing here? She looked down at her flowers, but didn't sniff them again. Oh, yes. What a good lady in waiting to bring me such a beautiful bouquet. She frowned. But one scent is not sweet. Take it out. I removed the bogweed and ground it under my foot. If I had thought of it, I could have asked her how she could be defeated. Who in the world knows how they could be defeated? I don't know how I could be defeated. Do you know how you could be defeated? I think, honestly, that would be a terrible question. What are your secrets was not a bad question. Anyway, Hattie's orders were chiefly chores. I think she lacked the imagination to devise more interesting commands. I brushed her clothes, cleaned her boots, rubbed her neck where it ached. Several times I had to sneak into the pantry and steal cookies. On one occasion, I had to clip her toenails. Do you rub brine into your feet? I asked, trying not to choke. I took revenge whenever I could. Spiders and mice from Madame Edith's cellar found their way into Hattie's bed. I'd stay awake at night and wait for the satisfying shriek. And so it went. Hattie issued commands and I retaliated, but there was no balance. Hattie was always ahead. She had the power. She held the whip. Areta was my only comfort. We ate our meals side by side. We sewed together. In our dancing lessons, we were partners. I told her about Frel and Mandy and Char. She told me about her parents, who kept an inn. They weren't wealthy, although another reason she was unpopular. When she left school, she would use her accomplishments to help them. She was kinder than anyone I'd ever known. When Julia, the tall wench, ate too many grapes from Madame Edith's arbor and was sick all night, Areta nursed her, although Julia's friend slept soundly. I helped, but only for Areta's sake. My nature was not so forgiving. In the garden one evening, I found myself telling Areta about Mother. Again, just like so admiring of Areta. I'm just saying. Before she died, we used to climb trees like this one. I rested a hand on the trunk of a low-branching oak. We'd go way up and sit as quiet as could be. Then we'd toss twigs or acorns at anyone who passed beneath. What happened to her? She asked. Don't tell me if you don't want to. I didn't mind. When I finished telling her, she sang an Aorthan morning song. I'm just going to read it. I wouldn't even guess at the tune. Hard farewell with no greeting to come. Sad farewell when love is torn away. Long farewell till death dies. But the lost one is with you. Her tenderness strengthens you. Her gaiety uplifts you. Her honor purifies you. More than memory, the lost one is found. I just teared up again. The fuck? Areta's voice was as smooth as syrup and as rich as gnome's gold. I cried, steady tears like rain. And like rain, they brought ease. That's the second time in a row that I've been like, oh, I teared up. And then like the next paragraph says that Ella cried. Like, am I remembering that these things make Ella cry? And that's what's making me tear up? Anyway, you have a beautiful voice, I said when I could speak. We Aorthans are all singers, but singing mistress says my voice is too husky. Hers is thin as a string, and yours is perfect. Romantic. A bell rang in the house, calling us in to prepare for bed. Is my nose red from crying? I asked. Oh my God. Okay. This is the scene that like, it could end in a kiss and it would make perfect sense. Okay, just like listen. Is my nose red from crying? I asked. A little. I don't want the others to see. I'll stay out a while longer. Manners mistress will be angry. I shrugged. She'll only tell me I've disgraced the king. I'll stay with you. I can watch your nose and tell you when it's not red anymore. Pay attention. Don't let your eyes wander. I wrinkled the feature. Areta giggled. I won't. Manners mistress will ask what we're doing out here. I was laughing too. I'll tell her I'm watching your nose. And I'll tell her I'm wrinkling it. She'll want to know what the king would think of our behavior. I'll tell her the queen watches every night while he wrinkles his nose 7 times. Those two people are married. Those two people are ostensibly in love with each other is all I'm saying. The bell rang again. Your nose isn't red now, Areta said. We ran for the house and met Manners mistress at the door on her way to search for us. The sight of her set us off again. Young ladies, go to your room. What would the king say? In the hall, still giggling, we met Hattie. Having a nice time? We were, I answered. I won't keep you then, but tomorrow, Ella, you must spend some time in the garden with me. You shouldn't associate with the lower orders like that wench from Aortha, she said the next evening. Areta is a higher order than you are, and I choose my own friends. My dear, I hate to cause you grief, but you must end your friendship with her. That's the end of chapter 11. You guys, I mean, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Let me know if you feel like this could be written realistically to be young love. Let me know. Okay, chapter 12. Hattie returned to the house, but I stayed outside. I watched her leave, hating her way of walking, a mince combined with a waddle. She stopped to pick a flower and lifted to her nose, posturing for me. I sat on a bench and stared down at the pebbled wall. In all the times I'd imagined the miseries she could inflict on me, I'd never imagined this. I'd thought of injuries and I'd imagined terrible embarrassment, but I'd never thought of this kind of hurt. Areta was in our room now, waiting to give me a lesson in Aorthan. I remained seated. I couldn't face her. Was there a way to stop being her friend without hurting her? I could pretend I had suddenly become mute, so I wouldn't be able to talk to her. But in that circumstance, she'd be my friend as much as ever. She'd talk to me, and we'd invent a sign language, which would be great fun. And that wouldn't be ending our friendship, so the curse wouldn't let me do it. Besides, a mistress would be sure to say, "Speak, Ella," and I would have to. I could announce that I'd taken a vow of loneliness, but Areta would be hurt that I'd taken such a vow. If only Mother hadn't forbidden me to tell about the curse. But then again, explaining would be an act of friendship, which the curse also wouldn't allow. Excuse me. The bell rang, calling us to bed. I was late again, but tonight there was no Areta to joke with about our tardiness. In our room, she sat on my bed, completing a letter for writing mistress. Where were you? I've been reviewing the imperative. I'm tired, I said, not answering the question. Perhaps I did look tired or troubled because she didn't press me. She only patted my arm and said, "We can study imperatives tomorrow." In bed, I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to savor the last few hours before I had to hurt her. Sleep on, Areta. Be my friend for one more night. A long vigil lay ahead. I pulled out my magic book. It opened to a letter from Dame Olga to her daughters. My sweet darlings, your poor mother is desolate without you. I attended a cotillion last night at the palace. I wore my wine-colored taffeta gown and my ruby pendant. But it was for naught. The company was thin because King Gerald is away, although Prince Charmant was there. That charming man Sir Peter wasn't there either. I was desolate. I understand he is off traveling and becoming richer, I imagine. I wish him well and will be first to pay my respects on his return. 3 pages followed describing Dame Olga's social calendar and her wardrobe. In closing, she remembered she had daughters and was writing to them. I hope both of you are eating well to keep up your strength. Olive, pray remember not to eat Madame Edith's flowers. If you were to sicken or die, I should be desolate. Hattie, I hope you have found a trustworthy servant to dress your hair. Madame E. promised it could be arranged. I expect the 2 of you are amazingly finished by now. But do not toil too hard, my dears. If you can sing and dance charmingly, eat daintily, and sew a little... you will be fine ladies, and I shall be proud of you. My sweets, the carriage has arrived. I'm in my lemon silk calling gown, and I must fly. Your adoring mother, Dame Olga. Kind of lost the voice there for a second. Why was a trustworthy servant necessary to dress Hattie's hair? I compared the luxuriant tresses of Hattie and her mother with Olive's thin curls, and I remembered Hattie's attack on my hair after she smelled the bogweed. I laughed out loud. Hattie and Dame Olga wore wigs. Thank you, Dame Olga. I hadn't expected to laugh tonight. I turned the page. On the verso was an illustration of a centaur cult. Apple, I was sure, nuzzling a young man, Char. The cult was beautiful. His hide was deep brown with a tan mane and an irregular tan star on his chest. Skinny and leggy, he was made for speed, although he was too young to bear a rider. Would he ever really be mine? On the right was a letter from Char to his father. Dear father, I hope this finds you safe and well. My mother and my sister and brothers are in good health, as am I. Since I received instruction to join you, I have been filled with gratitude for your confidence in me. The knights you have chosen to follow me are stout fellows and bear the command of a stripling with good humor. I don't know what that means. My mother worries, but I tell her they will not let harm befall me. In truth, father, I am so stirred up by the thought of my first military duty, even if it is only reviewing border troops, that I hardly hear my good mother. Who knows? Perhaps the ogres will raid and there will be a skirmish. I do not fear injury, only that I may not acquit myself well. Skirmishes with ogres? How could there not be danger? Char continued to describe the visit of a trade delegation and the same ball that Dame Olga had attended, although he didn't mention what he had worn. Near the bottom of the page, my name appeared. I am training a centaur cult for a lass I know. Her mother was the late Lady Eleanor. I admire the daughter Ella, but she has gone to finishing school where I fear she will be made less admirable. What do they teach in such places? Sewing and curtsying? It's a great distance to go to learn such paltry tricks. Would he stop liking me now that I was no longer clumsy? I had never enjoyed being a small elephant, and hadn't mourned the loss till now. Would he even be alive to stop liking me, or would he be an ogre's lunch? The next page was a letter from father to his bailiff. And I'm not saying that she couldn't also fall in love with Char. She could just be like a bisexual queen. That would be so cool. A bisexual literal queen. Father to his bailiff. Dear James, the post coach comes rarely to the elephants. Oh my god. Can't say elephants when I need to. No, okay. The post coach comes rarely to the Elves Forest, but it came today. I am still with the Greenies. The trading has been disappointing. They have not so much as shown me an agulin, no matter what I bring out to tempt them. Their chief trader, Slannon, knows little about bargaining. He gave me 3 vases in exchange for a gnomish copper stew pot, and the same for a simple wooden flute. Below were 3 pages of trades and sales. He closed with his intentions. I am making for Uaxi's farm. You may remember Uaxi, the giantess who entrusted her turnip harvest to me last year. On October 15th, she will marry off her daughter and I shall be there. I should like to see a giant's wedding. The ritual is said to be peculiar. Moreover, several fairies are likely to be present. They say hardly a wedding or birth takes place without at least one in attendance. If I can persuade a few to reveal themselves, I may be able to pick up some fairy-made trifles. I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry. Mandy had never told me that fairies liked to go to weddings and births, but she and Lucinda had both been present when I was born. Perhaps Lucinda would go to the Giants. It was the first time I'd ever known a definite place where she might be, where I might be too if I could get there. She might even be in a generous frame of mind, especially if she had just cast a well-meant, horrible spell. Perhaps she'd be so pleased that she'd release me from mine if I begged her to. I hadn't promised Father that I would stay at finishing school, only that I would go. I could leave whenever I wanted. And by leaving, I'd never have to take another order from Hattie. Areta would still think I was her friend. And if I succeeded with Lucinda, I still could be. Oh yeah, and it's like her whole motivating force for leaving is trying to preserve this friendship, this relationship with Areta, right? Like, I'm just saying. How late was it? How much of the night was left for travel? I stood up, then sat down again. How far was Uaxie's farm? The wedding was less than 2 weeks off. Could I get there in time? Frantically, I rifled the pages of my book, hoping to be vouchsafed a map. There, but it was the same one I'd looked at in the carriage on the way to finishing school. A frell, and no use to me now. No matter, I'd get directions somehow. In 5 minutes, my carpet bag was packed with a few essentials: tonic, my magic book, my dictionary, a shawl, and little else. After a long look at Areta's sleeping form, I left. A long, longing look. I paused before the door to the daisy room, then went in. With quiet steps, I approached Hattie's bed. She frowned in her sleep and mumbled. I only understood one word: royal. Her wig was askew. Neat-fingered as I had become, I was able to lift it off her without waking her. Now what to do with it? If I threw it into the dying fire, the smell might wake someone. I could drape it over the head of the china cat that adorned the mantelpiece, but if Hattie woke early, she could rescue it before anyone saw. So I took it with me, a trophy. So that's it. Chapters 10 through 12 of Ella Enchanted as a little treat. And there you go. Just like that. Last time they arrived at the finishing school, end of this session, she's leaving. So big stuff happening for Ella. Yeah, if there's anyone listening to this who agrees that the Areta relationship could be romantic, please let me know, because every time I read it, I become more convinced. So this is chapter 13. Okay. I slipped through the sleeping house as silently as a needle through lace. Outside, I waved farewell to the sleeping topiary. As I walked, the sky lightened. On the edge of Jen, that's the name of the town, I gave a baker the first sale of the day, 2 currant muffins and 2 loaves of traveler's bread in exchange for Hattie's wig, which he declared the finest he'd ever seen. Why a baker would know the quality of wigs is beyond me. That is my commentary. He'd never heard of Uaxie. Uaxie is the giant whose daughter's getting married, but said there were several giant farms up north. I heard they bake cookies as wide as my waist, he said. He drew a map for me in flour on his pastry board. The road would fork after I left Jen. The right-hand fork led back to Frell. The left fork was the one I wanted. My first landmark would be the Elves' Forest. After the forest, I would come to another fork. The road to the left, which I was not to take, led to the fens, where the ogres lived. The road on the right would lead me to the giants. When the cows became as big as barns, I would be there. It didn't seem far on the pastry board. My finger could travel the distance in a trice. The baker thought the trip would take 5 or 6 days by coach. How long do you think it would take to walk? Walking? He started to laugh. On foot? Alone? With ogres and bandits roaming the road? Sorry about that voice. Beyond Jen, I left the road, following it but too far away to be seen from it. I didn't fear pursuit by Madame Edith, who would probably conceal my disappearance for as long as possible in hopes I might return. The baker's worries about ogres and bandits I thought exaggerated, since a solitary traveler would hardly be worthwhile prey. However, I was wary of strangers. With my curse, I had to be. I wondered if I would meet Char on his way back to the fens. On his way to the fens. I liked thinking he might be near, but whether he was ahead of me or behind, or whether he had taken this route at all, I had no idea, and I wish my magic book had told me more. The road was little trafficked, and I was too happy about my escape to feel much fear. I was free of orders. If I wanted to eat my breakfast under a maple tree and watch the day grow between its leaves, I could, and did. If I wanted to skip or hop or run and slide on dew-wet leaves, I could, and did. And when the mood took me, I whistled or recited poems that I made up on the spot. I spent 2 glorious days this way, the best since before Mother had died. I saw deer and hares, and once at twilight, I swear I saw a phoenix rise, trailing smoke. On the 3rd day, I began to despair about reaching the giants in time. I hadn't even come to the Elves' Forest. If I had any chance of getting to the wedding, I should have passed the forest on the 2nd day, unless the baker had been mistaken about the distances from the forest to the giants. Perhaps they were much closer to each other than he thought. On the 4th day, I finished my last bit of traveler's bread. The land changed to sandy fields and low scrub, and I began to despair about reaching the Giants before the newlyweds celebrated their first anniversary. On the 5th day, I knew I was doomed to wander in endless barrens till I died. On the 6th day, there were more trees, but I was too dazed by hunger to realize their significance. I was searching the ground for the lacy flowers of the wild carrot when I caught a shift in the shadows ahead of me, a flash of motion among the tree trunks. A deer? A walking bush? There, I saw it again. An elf! Kumekims Poud, I said. It means sun and rain, or hello in Elfian. Kumekims Poud. An elf woman approached me hesitantly. Her robe was woven in a dappled fabric, the shadow of leaves on the forest floor. Speak Elfian? Yungar, a little. I tried to smile at her, but her expression was so solemn I couldn't. Af enk poel? She asked. Doc ench Ella, jort her Sir Peter Hux Frel. I wondered if she knew father. Sir Peter, what a len. Her tone was dismissive. She stepped closer and stared at me. I met her gaze, and I hoped I didn't seem sly, too. Her eyes poured into me. I was sure she knew every one of my unkind thoughts, knew about the theft of Hattie's wig, knew each time I'd made my finishing school mistresses uncomfortable, and knew I hadn't had a bath since I'd left Jen. Mundlen, she smiled and took my hand. Her fingers felt waxy, like a leaf. Not like father. She led me to Slannon, the elves' chief trader, who spoke Kyrian fluently. He was the one father had mentioned in his letter. He confirmed that the baker's map was accurate. I didn't say anything, but my face must have shown how bitter my disappointment was. You will join your father at the Giant's farm? He asked. I nodded. But I'm not hurrying to him, I blurted. Then I stopped. Oh, I'm sorry. I think this is how it's supposed to be read. But I'm not hurrying to him, I blurted, then stopped. You seek something else from the Giants. His amber eyes searched my face. Someone I must find. I must find her. Slannon patted my arm. Elves will help. In the morning you will see, but you must spend the night as our guest. He smiled, showing pale green teeth. I smiled back, reassured, although one wouldn't expect green teeth to be reassuring. The elves were the same height as humans. With their mossy hair and green skin tinged with orange for the coming autumn, they were no more frightening than a pumpkin vine. And now, please join us for our evening meal. We sat at a table with 12 elves, who knew only a little Kyrian, but with my bit of Elfian and gestures and laughter, we cobbled together a language understood by all. Their supper was more drink than meal. The appetizer was lemon parsnip soup, followed by turtle barley soup, the main course, succeeded by a soup of chopped raw green vegetables, the salad course. Dessert was a fruit soup. It was all delicious, even though my jaw wished for something to chew on. When we finished eating, Slannon said that elves like to sleep soon after nightfall. He led me to my sleeping place. We passed the elves' nursery, where clusters of small hammocks hung from trees like bunches of grapes. 2 adult elves, one with a flute and one singing, threaded their way through, the singer occasionally rocking a group of hammocks gently. When we reached the oak from which my hammock hung, I asked for a lantern to read by. What book is better than sleep when the sun goes down? Slannon asked, calling for a light. I had been afraid to show Mandy's present to anyone since Hattie had taken Mother's necklace, but now I produced it from my carpet bag. Slannon opened it. The Shoemaker and the Elves returned as the first story. He roared with laughter. We are so tiny here! The elves can fit inside a shoe! He looked through the rest of the book, admiring the illustrations and reading parts of different stories. Then he turned back to the Shoemaker and the Elves, but it was gone. In its place was a story about a walrus and a camel. Fairy maid, he cried. This is precious. It must give you much comfort. He returned it to me. Do not read too late. You have a long journey tomorrow. After 2 stories, I blew out my light. The night was clear. My ceiling was sky and an eyelash of a moon. By shifting from side to side, I made my hammock swing me into sleep. In the morning, Slannon asked me to show my book to the other elves. To them, it was written in Elfian. They were enchanted and might have read all day, except that Slannon stopped them. You have given us much pleasure, he said, and now we'd like to show you something wonderful too. He lifted several packages onto the table he used to display goods for trading. Then he began to remove their oak leaf wrappings. Are these by Agulon? I asked, when a bit of pottery emerged. You've heard of him, he said, sounding pleased. Yes, he made them. A nut dish was unwrapped first, modeled in the shape of a centaur. It rested on the table but was in motion nonetheless. More than in motion, the centaur was motion. His head thrust into the wind. His arms hugged his form. His mane and tail streamed back, and without moving, such was Agulon's skill, his legs beat the ground. I actually think I read this chapter or a section of it on the podcast the first time I talked about this book, because I love the descriptions of these, of this pottery stuff so much. And all of this whole elf chapter, I just love. Next came a dragon-shaped coal scuttle that glowed golden orange. Somehow, the air shimmered around its foot-long frame. Its ruby eyes were windows to an interior furnace. I was afraid to touch the beast for fear of being scorched. But my favorite was a stirrup cup molded in the shape of a wolf's head and shoulders, with the head lifted to the mouth. Doesn't make any sense. With the head lifted and the mouth pulled into an O for a long howl. The ridges in the pottery for his fur were so fine that each hair was defined. I felt the tension in his shoulders where the cup ended, and I imagined the rest of him, sitting but erect, with excitement running through him from his big paws to the end of his plumy tail. I loved his howl, which I could both hear and feel, long and plaintive, woebegone and heartsore, filled with yearning for what used to be and what would never come again. He's beautiful. They're all beautiful. They don't look as though someone made them. They look born. Slannon began to wrap the pieces up again. I hated to let them go. Wrap this one last, please. I touched the wolf's nose. When he finished, Slannon handed the package with the wolf to me. It's for you. Father had made clear that an agulum was worth a great deal. I can't accept such a valuable gift, I said in my best manners mistress manner, but his hands closed around it. But my hands closed around it. You have, Slannon said, smiling. We like to give our pieces away sometimes, when we find someone who will love them. Thank you. Don't cry. Slannon gave me a green handkerchief. He looked at me consideringly. Sir Peter is a witty man and a shrewd trader, but if he had admired our things as you do, we would have been gladder to let him have them. But he told me that you are the best potters. He should have told us. How can I exchange this gnomish copper stew pot for 2 such paltry vases? He'd say. The workmanship doesn't compare, he'd say. And Father thought Slannon a poor trader. My gift was packed on a fat pony along with enough food to last until I reached my destination. More elvish generosity, although the pony was alone. Vib ol peswado, Slannon said in parting. Stay in the shade. With any luck, you will reach the giants in 3 or 4 days. But I had no luck. That's the end of chapter 13. And I only had to take 1 burp break and 1 sneeze break and 2 nose blowing breaks. So hopefully I cut all of those out and you were none the wiser, but now you know. So yeah, I just super love the fact that the elves change color with the trees. I love how connected they are with the forest that they're part of. I love this like minute, like inconsequential detail that all of their food is soup. They just seem very lovingly kind of imagined and crafted to me. So I really enjoy that. And also kind of that they are their own like very independent culture that values very independently different things to people like the humans, like people more like, you know, Ella's father, who is like such a shrewd negotiator that he screwed himself out of getting any pieces by Agulon by not just complimenting the beautiful work that was before him and like appreciating it. So, and I enjoy that as a value in general, like valuing appreciation for beautiful things. The morning after I left the elves, an ogre woke me by poking me with a stick. Wake up, breakfast. How do you like to be cooked? Bloody, medium, or done to a crisp? Uh-oh. 8 ogres surrounded me. It will only hurt for a minute. My ogre, the one who woke me, stroked my cheek. I'm a fast eater. I looked at the others, searching vainly for a sympathetic face. Not far off, I saw my saddlebags next to a pile of bones. Whose bones? I hated to think. Then I realized. The elf's pony. I swallowed convulsively. My stomach heaved and I threw up. When I was done, my ogre spat at me. His spittle burned my cheek. I wiped it off with my hand, and my hand burned too. Oh God, there's so much ogres in this chapter. We're gonna power through. Forns you've among f nushun, he growled. It will taste sour for hours. I was an it. I had studied sufficient ogres to understand almost everything. One of the women spoke. I think she was a woman because there was less hair. Oh, okay. One of the women spoke. I think she was a woman because there was less hair on her face and she was shorter than my ogre. And I think he was a man. She called, okay, gender roles. She called my ogre Seif and asked him if he thought he was going to eat it all by himself. He answered that he'd found it and caught it, so it belonged to him. Anyway, he added, if you shared, there wouldn't be enough to go around. And besides, he'd allowed everyone to eat the pony. Thank God that she summarized this instead of making me read all of that ogres. Her answer was that the pony had been last night, that they were hungry again, and he had always had 100 reasons not to share, and that he didn't care if the whole tribe starved so long as he got his special treat. He lunged at her, and she lunged at him. In a moment, they were rolling on the ground, with everyone watching. Except me. I looked for a place to hide. Not far from where I stood was a low tree, still covered with leaves. If I could get there and climb it, maybe they wouldn't think to look up when they searched for me. I edged sideways. The combatants were pulling each other's hair and biting and yelling. I was halfway to the tree. "It's escaping, Seif!" one of the ogres yelled. The brawl ended immediately. "Stop!" Seif commanded in Kyrian. I took a few more steps and almost reached the tree, but the curse wouldn't let me go farther. Seif dusted himself off, although there was no visible difference between dusty and dusted. "I told you how obedient it is," he said in Ogres. "No need to be persuasive with this one. It'd cook itself if we told it to." He was right. If they wanted to fry me, I'd step right into the pan. I stood where I was, pretending I had no idea what they were saying. After further bickering, they decided to take me with them, hoping to capture additional people or animals on the road to eat along with me. Side dishes, I supposed. I was allowed to take my saddlebags and my carpet bag. Seif wanted to know if there was food in them, and there was great excitement when I said yes, but when they opened the elves' flasks, they spat in disgust. "La foune rouge! Vegetables! Fish!" The ogres pronounced the words as though they were poisonous. Seif scratched his head. "I wonder how I can eat those things and still taste good," he said. "Maybe it doesn't taste good. We haven't eaten it yet." The speaker was the ogre who had warned of my escape. He was younger than the others, approximately my own age. We set out on the road, moving almost as quickly as my pony had. I had to ride on their shoulders, holding their oily hair. Ugh. We were traveling away from Yoaxi's farm, back the way we'd come. I assumed the ogres meant to go to the fork in the road and proceed to their fens. It made no difference. What did it matter if I were devoured 10 miles from my destination or 40? Sorry about that. Sorry about that, buzzing. Sorry. No one was on the road, and the hills through which we marched were empty of habitation. The ogres began to grumble. "It gets heavier every mile. Perhaps it brings bad luck. We should eat it tonight and find more tomorrow." They watched me enviously while I drank the elves' supper. I was surprised I could eat, but I was ravenous. I offered to share with them, but my only answer was a collective shudder. "You might enjoy it," I said. "Perhaps you'd find that you prefer broccoli to flesh and legumes to legs." The last suggestion made them laugh. The youngest ogre told Seif in Ogres, "Maybe we should get to know our meals better. This one makes jokes." "Don't make a pet of it," Seif warned. After dinner, the young ogre sat next to me. "You mustn't be frightened," he said. "No? My name is Nish. What's yours?" I told him. "My father's name is Seif. He could convince you that we won't harm you. I'm not as good at convincing people yet, but we hate for people to be upset." He touched my arm sympathetically. I felt calmer. I couldn't help it. His voice was so soothing. "You must be tired after such a terrible day." I yawned. "Why don't you stretch out right here? I'll make sure nothing harms you while you sleep." Wasn't he going to bind me? A bubble of hope swelled in my mind. "But don't run away." The bubble burst. In the middle of the night, I awoke. Seif slept closest to me, making gurgling noises and grinding his teeth. Ogres are sound sleepers. I stood and picked my way over them, which was difficult because they slept almost on top of one another. I bumped the leg of one, and he or she kicked at me but slept on. Beyond the heap of their bodies, I found my saddlebags. I tried to leave, but as soon as I crept more than a few yards beyond the pile of ogres, my complaints started. Thudding heart, tight chest, spinning head. A few feet more, and I was on my knees, crawling in circles. I crept back to the farthest spot my curse let me feel comfortable. The ogres wouldn't wait much longer to kill me. I had to break the spell now. "The spell is broken," I announced aloud, but softly. "I need not obey Nish. I will escape." But in a moment, I was on my knees again, helpless and sobbing. I tried again, mimicking the ogres. I made my voice as persuasive as I could. "What is a spell?" I asked myself. "Only words. I can walk away from these ogres. I can do it. No magic can stop me." I stood and took confident steps. I was moving quickly, fearlessly. The spell was broken. Then I saw Seif almost at my feet. I had gone the wrong way. I bit back a scream of rage. I was going to die soon, and I would never have found Lucinda, would never have lived uncursed. I returned to the end of my invisible tether and battled my despair. My voice has been persuasive. My voice had been persuasive. Might not persuasion have other uses? Could I mimic the ogres? Could I speak with their persuasive power? For a while, my voice sounded too harsh. It needed honey for sweetness and oil for smoothness. I imagined swallowing a mixture of the two and coating my throat with them. Sing, lalfun, has limun, lalfun effuth wath pushabus. It meant one should eat vegetables, not humans, because vegetables taste more delicious. It sounded persuasive to me. I was convinced. I practiced for hours and fell asleep practicing, and woke up to Niche practicing on me. Wake up, dearie. You were wise not to leave us during the night. These lands are dangerous. An elf might have gotten you. The image of a fierce, spear-carrying elf came to me. Let's eat it now, said a female ogre. You can't have all of it, Sif. We'll get more food soon. All right, if I get a leg. He held my shoulders. She nodded. I'll be content with an arm if I can have an ear, too. In a moment, all my parts were claimed. Niche wanted to keep me alive a while longer, but he gave in when he was allowed to have my neck. Oh, Niche. So fickle. The best part, he said, coming close and patting it. Oh, my God. Sif said, I want to be the one to kill it. He jerked me away from Niche. I began in Ogreese. It came out as a squeak. Sif bared his teeth. The points glistened. Saliva dripped from his lips. I tried again. You're not really hungry. You're full. My voice was raspy. More honey, more oil. I'm really messing up the tones of these efforts. Sorry. The ogres stared, as surprised as if a rock had spoken. I knew it was smart. Niche sounded proud of me. Too bad we're hungry, Sif crouched. It would have made a good pet. He held my leg, his portion, and lowered his head, his teeth inches from my thigh. Honey and oil. How can you eat me? You're too full to eat. All of you are. Your bellies are as heavy as sacks of melons. Sif stopped. I went on. You just had a wonderful meal of 8 fat ladies. If you eat me too, you'll get sick. You want to go back to sleep off your big meal. Sif let me go. I stepped away from him. You feel tired. The ground is so soft, so comfortable, I said. Niche rubbed his eyes and stretched. I continued soothingly. It's much too early to be awake. The day has barely begun, and it will be a lovely, lazy, sleepy day. Sif sat. His head rolled onto his chest. You can sleep and have delicious dreams. While you're sleeping, I'll find you another enormous meal of piglets and people and elves and elephants and horses and no hornets, Niche muttered from a dream. Sleep had claimed them. They had returned to their heap of the night, again grunting and snoring and groaning. I almost laughed and broke the spell. Who was giving orders now? That's the end of chapter 14. I'm going to read at least one more. This is like really at the epicenter of what I really love about Ella as a character, and specifically as like a reimagining of a fairy tale sort of like heroine, is that she's very, very clever. She uses her talents in creative ways. She doesn't need no man to save her, I guess, is the simple way to say it. But like, she just at least partially saved herself from that absolutely life-threatening situation. And you see plenty of it in real life, but you don't see a lot of that in, fairy tale stories. So I really, really love that about this book and this character. And I love that I guess if you're going to just go for it at any point, you might as well when they're about to eat you anyway. But anyway, here is chapter 15. I sobered quickly. What was I going to do with them? How could I arrive at Euaxie's farm with 8 ogres in tow? My situation hadn't improved significantly. I was still alive, but not for long. I would have to sleep eventually. Then they'd awaken and remember their true hunger. A twig snapped behind me. I turned and saw a vision. 6 knights carrying ropes strode toward me, led by a tall young man. Visions don't snap twigs, and the young man was Char. He saluted me, but his eyes were on the ogres. Uncoiling a length of rope, he knelt over Sif and began to bind their ankles. The ogres slept soundly, but they were not unconscious. As soon as he felt the cord tighten, Sif woke with a roar, which shrank to a purr when he saw Char. "What an honor, your highness, but why do you bind an ally?" He reached down and loosened the rope. That was proper. Char shouldn't have been fettering his friend. But Char pushed Sif's hands aside and tightened the rope again. How could he be so cruel? The knights had begun to bind the other ogres, who were also stirring. Sif tried again. "Prince, I would sacrifice my life for you, and you treat me so rudely." Still, Char paid no attention. I watched stupidly while Sif's feet lashed out. Char reeled back, losing his grip on the rope. Sif rose and kicked the tether away. The knights hadn't made much progress with their binding. Either. Everywhere they were doing battle. An ogre knelt over one fallen knight, about to sink teeth into his shoulder. The knight twisted away, gaining a few seconds, but the ogre was turning toward him. Char regained his feet and drew his sword. He and Sif faced each other, warily. Char spoke to me, his voice oddly loud. "Can you tame them again, Ella? If not, run and save yourself." The question cleared my wits. "Sif, Niche, ogre friends," I called in ogrese. "Why do you wish to destroy your benefactors? They have food for you, but they cannot give it to you until you do what they want." The ogres stopped clawing and biting and pounding and lunging and kicking and looked at me trustfully. "Would you like to know what the food is?" I asked. "Please," Sif said. "The treat they have for you is a dozen baby giants, only 6 months old." They all smiled beatifically. "But these friends can't bring the feast unless you let them tie and gag you. When they bring out the infants, they'll remove your bindings. So seat yourselves and hold out your arms and legs. They will be gentle." Only Niche remained standing, looking dazed. "Sit," Sif commanded. Niche sat. The tying and gagging was completed quickly. Then the ogres were bound together, treatment that they endured cheerfully. "Ella," Char swept a deep bow. He'd grown taller. "How did you tame the ogres?" His voice was too loud again. "I'm skilled at tongues, and I can't hear you. Oh, I forgot." He extracted something from his ears. "Beeswax." "That's why the ogre's magic had no effect on you." Once we sight ogres, we always put the wax in. The danger is being caught unawares. Also, they're like big and strong and stuff. That's also part of the danger. It seemed like they might not have been able to get the better of those ogres without Ella's help, actually. Char said that one of the knights, acting as a scout, had seen me. He reported that a band of ogres was about to eat a maiden when she talked them to sleep. "How did you do it?" I told them about finishing school, and they began to snore. "Truly?" Char stared at me, then laughed. It was delightful to make him laugh. He was always so surprised. "How did you really do it?" he persisted. I spoke to them in Ogrese, and I imitated their oily way of talking. I didn't know if I would succeed. They had already parceled me up. I knew which one was going to eat every bit of me. Sif, that one, wanted my leg. Char moved his own right leg. "How did they come upon you?" I told him I had run away from finishing school. "They caught me when I left the elves. They ate the pony the elves gave me." I shuddered. "Was finishing school so wearisome that you had to run away?" he asked. "Very wearisome, and see what it's done to me. I can no longer break a set of dishes by accident. Now I can balance all of them on my head and stroll through Frel without dropping a single one. I have many accomplishments." "Are you proud of them?" He was alarmed. I nodded solemnly. I wanted to make him laugh again. "Would you like to know more?" He shrugged, disliking the topic. I went on anyway. To begin with, I could teach these boorish ogres how to eat properly. I seated myself on a large rock. "Observe." I plucked an imaginary napkin out of the air, shook it twice, and placed it on my lap. "Very ladylike," Char said politely. I shake the napkin twice. That's important. "Why?" "Mice." Char smiled. "There are no mice in our court napkins. You are thinking of spiders." "The prince contradicts a lady." I picked up an imaginary fork and began to saw at imaginary food. "Your meat is tough. You have a low regard for our cooks." "Not at all. It should be tough. Don't you know why?" "Tell me." "It is mutton." "Am I not using a mutton fork? Our manners mistress will believe you're an imposter if you don't recognize a mutton fork when I don't see one." He was laughing. "It could only be a mutton fork." "How so?" "See how my fingers are bunched together at the top of the stem?" I reached up and caught Char's hand. It was square and large. I extended my index finger. "My finger is the fork. You grasp it so." I arranged his fingers around mine. His grip was firm. That's the only correct way to hold a mutton fork. A trout fork is managed differently. I turned his hand over to demonstrate. Angry red welts ran across his palm. "The rope burned you." He pulled his hand away. "It's nothing. One of the knights is a healer." "What else did your manners mistress teach you?" I wanted to examine the burn more closely, but I continued. Manners Mistress knew your father's opinion about everything. She said he would exile any subject who ate blancmange from a soup bowl. As a result of her instruction, I can never make such a mistake. Does my father have a special spoon for raspberries and one for blueberries? Certainly. Why wasn't I informed? You should hire a manners mistress. She would die of delight to serve a prince. I went on to describe all our mistresses. Writing mistress was the only one who taught anything worth knowing, I concluded, although it is helpful to know the proper way to behave, so one can decide whether or not to be proper. On the word proper, Char started. I should have introduced you long ago to my knights, he called to them. Friends, John, Aubrey, Bertram, Percival, Martin, Stephen. Meet our ogre tamer. She's the lass I told you about, the one who speaks gnomic. He had told them about me. I curtsied. We wondered when you would remember your manners, the one named Stephen said. Seif made a garbled noise through his gag. For a moment I had forgotten him. Char went to the ogres, and I followed. So much as you are our friends, so much we are your friends, he said. But we won't kill you unless you force us to. For an instant, Seif looked dumbstruck. Then he began to struggle violently against his bonds. The other ogres did likewise, and shrieked through their gags as well. The ropes held, and they quieted slowly. Seif glared at me with such rage and hate that I fell back a step. I held his gaze, however. You are never going to eat me, I told him in Ogrese. I am not an it, and I'm not your dinner. And how do you like being tricked into doing what you don't want to do? Telling them felt wonderful. I smiled at Char. For some reason, he blushed. Oh, by the way, the amount of obliviousness to him clearly being interested in her that is in this book is probably less realistic than the fantasy creatures to me. He tells everyone he knows about her. He laughs constantly when he's with her. He blushes when she smiles at him. And then she's like, he's not interested in me. Spoilers. Anyway. While Char and I addressed the ogres, the knights were busy setting out lunch for all of us. When we were seated, we delayed our first bite until Char began to eat. It was so natural to him, I doubted he noticed. Over traveler's bread, cheese, dried meats, and sweet cider, he told me about his mission to help King Gerald. The king will be glad to see this lot. 8 ogres and no injury to us. Sir Stephen nodded at the ogres, who were struggling anew at the sight of our meal. He'll be interested to learn that humans can use their magic against them, Char said. At least Ella can. Whenever he finds out, Sir Bertram frowns, how will we convey them to King Gerald? Whenever he finds out, Sir Bertram frowned, I think is how that's supposed to be read. No need for your melancholy, Sir Bert, Sir John said. With this maid's help, we just caught 8 ogres. 6 knights never did that before. We'll think of something, Char said. They'll have to be fed, Sir Bertram reached for the bread. And you're the best hunter we have, Sir Bert, Char said, and the knight's expression lightened. Ogres can move quickly, Sir Martin said. It shouldn't take too long to reach the king. The number of sirs in this conversation is really rough. I've been told they can outrun a horse, Sir Stephen said. A centaur, too, even a hart. While Char and the knights discussed ogre transport, I thought about the wedding and despaired of getting there in time. It was 3 days from now, and I was even farther from the giants than I had been when the ogres had captured me. If I walked, I would arrive weeks late, and then I remembered Nish's order not to run away. I could not leave anyway. Sir Bertram's gloomy voice penetrated my thoughts. We'll have to drag them, and how can we do that? The young lady can tell them to go wherever we say, Sir Aubrey said. She can come with us to keep them biddable. Let the prince tell us what to do, Sir Stephen said. He knows. Char spoke confidently. You, Stephen, will escort the Lady Ella to her destination, wherever that is. Martin and Percival will ride to my father for assistance. Sir Bert, Aubrey, John, and I shall take turns hunting and guarding the ogres. We'll put the wax back in our ears when we are within earshot of them in case their gags slip. I'd rather stay with you, lad, Sir Martin said. You and Percival are our best scouts. We'll depend on you to get through quickly. Sir Martin nodded. The maiden will be safe with me, Sir Stephen vowed. Unless he talks her to death, Sir Aubrey interrupted. You don't know him, lady. His speech stops only when the stars shine green in a yellow sky. He'll be better company than ogres, Char said. But Ella, why didn't you go back to Frel when you left finishing school? My father is trading at a giant's farm, where a wedding will take place soon. He wrote that giants' weddings are interesting. I thought I'd join him there. Char marveled. You put yourself in such danger in order to see a wedding? He thought me a fool. No, he fucking didn't, Ella. Sir Bertram smiled. Sir Bertram spoke. No indication on whether or not he was smiling. I made that up. It's fortunate that all the maidens in Curia do not decide to travel by themselves. We have work enough without having to rescue them. If all the maids in Curia could tame ogres, Char said, we would have much less to do. Perhaps not such a fool, after all. After lunch, Sir Stephen mounted his horse, and Char lifted me behind him. As soon as he did, my curse-caused complaints began. In a moment, I was going to fall off the horse. The curse wasn't going to let me abandon the ogres. I don't like to leave you in danger, I said, starting to dismount. Go with Sir Stephen, said Char. We won't come to harm. It was an order. I could go. My symptoms stopped. Char caught the horse's bridle. Will you soon be in Frel again? If Father doesn't send me back to finishing school, and if he doesn't want me to travel with him. Why did he want to know? Did he want me to be? Idiot. Why do you ask? He didn't answer directly. I should be back shortly. These maneuvers never last long. He spoke as though he'd been on thousands. Perhaps I'll see you soon then, and you can tell me about the other ogres you catch. Perhaps you can teach me how to tame an ogre. Thun Sing, I said. That's farewell. It sounds evil. It is, I answered, and we parted. All right, so that's chapter 15. Another lovely interaction between two lovely young people that are clearly into each other and a bunch of knights. So I love it. You love to see it. And next up, a giant's wedding.
Fine lives, find a fine time to shine a little vice and a little in the band in the down. Sitting down, doing a bit in the vice. Ding down, doing a little in the band. Hey! Touch silent and in the band in the night of the fine night, and a little in the band in the night. Touch silent and in the band in the band in the night of the fine Dixie. No. Sway